Okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a little project until 11 o'clock. So here's the question. As you consider and dream about the months and years ahead as a family of churches here in Ethiopia, what do you think good and fruitful gospel partnership could look like for you? What do you think in these 4 brackets? Number 1, fellowship and care. So imagine you've got the 10 churches. What would fellowship and care look like amongst those pastors? Number 2, ordination and theology. How could you work together to ordain people and to possibly train people towards that? Number 3, mission and outreach. Is there anything you could do together in that, in terms of mission and outreach? And then number 4, finances and prayer. How could you work together and raise funds, collect funds, whatever it is, so that you're building a pot to see future churches planted here in Ethiopia and carrying that together in prayer?
You might need to repeat that.
Yep. So as you consider and dream about the months and years ahead as a family of churches here in Ethiopia, what do you think good and fruitful gospel partnership could look like? Number 1, fellowship and care. Number 2, ordination and theology. Number 3, mission and outreach. And number 4, finances and prayer. Does that make sense? So work on it, finances and prayer. So is there anything you could be doing? So you might even think, you know what, I wonder if there was 10 churches, we could do a monthly newsletter to all our churches here in Ethiopia so they know what's going on, so we could be praying. I don't know. Just think about, what could we do? Yeah, it's really good. That's really excellent. I like that. Any other thoughts from you, Riley, in addition?
No.
I thought that was really excellent. I think the one other thing you can do, but I think it was already mentioned, is have like a Sovereign Grace Eastern African conference at least once a year, where you probably bring in some guys in, possibly even from overseas, because that can help the global, it can help it feel more relational again, and at the same time really serving Eastern African pastors. Those things I've always enjoyed as a foreigner, as an international. They start to feel like, because I've been going to them since like 1988, 1999, they start to feel like family reunions. That you go back and you see, you know, so you'll find next time I see you guys, it'll be like, oh, how you going and what's happened? You feel closer. So those types of events can really help your shared history.
Probably one thing you could add would be like having an appointed regional leader, whoever that might be, and then a director of church care or someone that actually coordinates all of this, because you might need to appoint someone to that task to actually make it happen.
Yeah, that would be common. So once you got to 10 churches, you're practically a nation. You would probably have, those two factors. You'd have a director of church care, probably. They are thinking through, how are you guys going? It's a bit of a Titus in some ways. It's like, how are the pastors being cared for in the different places? Are the churches feeling connected? That could really help, yes. Yeah, everybody who serves extra locally in Sovereign Grace is also a local elder. Everybody. It's actually written into our Book of Church Order. You can't have an itinerant ministry and not be an elder. So it doesn't work like that. You've got to be grounded somewhere and cared for somewhere and accountable somewhere. And then you serve extra locally as part of your role. All right, that's excellent. What about ordination and theology? So we've worked out how we're going to care for these guys. How are we even going to get to 10 churches? How are we going to keep all 10 churches ideally not only cared for, but theologically sharpened? So as new ideas, new things come into Ethiopia, how do you keep the churches together? Understanding we need to protect our folk from this. So ordination and theology, what did you guys get for that? Yes, there's room. Now at the minute, still everybody around the world is doing the same one. But there is room. But you would have to show to the Council of Elders effectively how you want to change it and why you want to change it in terms of standard. So what they have changed is 2 years ago, to be ordained, you had it was about 1,800 pages of reading you had to do. It was required. Now that's been changed to recommended. That changes everything. Because if for so many cultures, South Korea, for example, all the books aren't available in South Korean. So they couldn't even, how do I even do it? So that's out the way now. So really, I reckon for a lot of you men that had finished this college, for example, I'd pretty much I would be thinking the vast majority would probably pass the ordination exam just from what you've learned this year. It's not crazy hard. It would be more, I think, for maybe brothers that could never sit in a room like this and they're serving out in the tribes or in the rural environments. It might be a taller order for them. But right now, the Philippines are a good illustration where they're actually still, they formed like little training cohorts. And so the ordination process is a year, but it's also a discipleship. So they're really discipling through the material, and then they sit their exams. But the answer is yes, you would need to think through. Minimally, you'd probably need to be thinking, okay, for Somalians, it's going to need to be in the Somali language. Kenyans, it's going to need to be in Kenyan. You know, it's like you can't always do it in English. So re-educating to the... I mean, another example would be, for example, the test is written in the English, but in the Philippines, we do let them do it sometimes orally. So they'll actually talk to them in Tagalog and just say, okay, well, it's either this, or this. What do you think is the answer? And then they write it down for them. And so there's flexibility for the international partners. But you still want to make sure, as an ecclesiastical group, because here's the way it works. Here's the sort of crunch point. However you change up the exam, the end game behind the exam is this ecclesiastical group that are all equal. So if you let people in who are not really qualified, that's when you've got a major problem. Because suddenly, so if you two get ordained and you start a church out there, you have the same say as Michael Granger and Josh do. Exactly the same say. So you want to make sure you two are definitely qualified. And then if you go again and it's somebody we've only just met and we've maybe made it quite easy for them, they also have the same say as Josh Pennell and Michael Granger, because that's the way the union works. So you really want to make sure that whoever comes in, you can hand on heart go, well, I'm good. I want them to have a say. I want them to be able to speak into our union and our community. So these training pieces become really important. Yeah. Made you think? What about you guys? What did you get for ordination and theology? Obviously, one of the advantages you're all going to have is, for many of you men, if you get ordained, you will just go through the ordination as is. And I think that's important, because I think it helps you get in with the right integrity. But it has the other side of that. The other side is you'll have more of an insight into, will this work for the people you're trying to, once you've done it, you obviously know what it is. And you might say, look, I've been able to pass that after much effort, but I've had a year at pastor's college, I'm educated. I don't know if some of these guys I'm reaching could get to that stage. That's when you can have a better conversation. That's easier to advocate for. Because you're like, yeah, you've done it. You know what it is. You just haven't done it yet. But you are right. You could definitely... Okay, what about mission and outreach? What could you do together? Would you do anything together? What do you think about that? Obviously, big part of mission, we're talking about church planting. So how would you work together to plant churches? What did you guys get for that? Mission and outreach. Good idea. Yeah, great. Another thing that's quite common in Sovereign Grace on a similar vein is where, say, if you are close enough, if these guys are organising a real strong missional weekend, because they're trying to get their launch plank going and they're doing, it's not uncommon for Sovereign Grace, other churches to say, we'll send 15 people to help. We'll run your kids' ministry that week, or we'll help with that youth event, or we'll help set up. So that their church isn't just doing all the bits, they can just talk to people. That's quite common. So you're sort of trying to partner in some of the missional pieces to kind of release that new church plant to actually be talking to people and doing what they do. And it's great. Anything for you guys, mission and outreach? Yeah, that's what you would eventually have. So if you attend churches, whether you call it this or not, you would effectively have a Mark Prater. You'd have an executive director that's just making sure everybody's working on the same thing. And then you'd probably have somebody that's going to do church care. Somebody else that's probably going to think the theology and make sure all the ordination processes are working out. So you'd start to spread out those roles. But if you don't have a person sort of pulling it all together, it lacks any direction. So at a smaller level, we call them regional leaders. And then as a family of churches grows, we call them an executive director. That's the way it goes. So yeah, you definitely need that extra local leadership. Again, in the Book of Church Order, it talks all about that, of how are we going to do that extra local leadership. Some people are going to push back and say, I don't think you should have any extra local leadership. I'd say you're crazy, because I don't know how you're going to get anything done. You're just going to be like, do we just all sit and wait? Who's even calling the meeting? It's so strange. So yeah, you would definitely look to have.
And it doesn't mean they're all paid or working full time.
No, they might not be paid at all. It might just be the way. So it might be that the way you're going to serve this region is you're going to help make sure all the ordinations are happening. You're not paid for it, it's just part of your role.
Alongside being the pastor.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's kind of how we do it.
And what tends to happen is, say you have got 10 churches, say the finance piece, you would actually have a finance committee, which you actually vote in. You vote for 3 or 4 different churches to put in a finance person. And then they don't have authority to do what they want, but they come up with an annual budget. And they would say to the group of churches, hey, listen, with your executive director, with your leader, this is what we're thinking we could do this year with the money we have. What do we think? And it's actually voted on by all the region. And if you all agree, or like 70% or 80% or something, that's what you do. So it's very much group. It's leader, but group. In some ways, although we're not congregational at a church level, when it comes to interdependence, we are more congregational at that level. Yeah. It's more like, much more. Okay, it's a plurality amongst the leaders. So what are we all thinking here? So I don't, even as Emerging Nations Director, I don't have any authority to say to Sovereign Grace, well, this is the way we're going. I can pitch that to the Council of Elders, and if they agree, that's the way we're going. And it's kind of healthy. It kind of works. Because I think it's different but again, I think that's biblical. The Jerusalem Council, there was a sense of, hey, what do we all think about this? So I think that's important. It also, because the other side of the coin, this guy loves church discipline, he's mentioned it about 10 times. The other side of the coin, what do you do if one of those 10 churches starts to go rogue? So your next thing you know, they've ordained a woman and they think homosexuality is fine. What are you going to do?
Send Faisal.
Your region actually has the authority to censure that church and put them out. And that's right. That's the right thing to do. But that power doesn't reside in the leader, for example. It's not the executive director that could just say, I'm not even listening to anybody, you're out. It doesn't work like that. The executive director should be saying to the other churches, I'm deeply concerned about this church. I think it's time that they're removed. Who's with me type thing. And everybody's going to go, yes. Okay, well, brothers, you're out of our family churches, that's what. Not you personally.
You're out before you're in.
Yeah, you're out before you're in. It's such a shame. What about finances and prayer? The final part of the puzzle you've already touched on. Anything else for you guys under that finance piece? You're already talking about, okay, probably collecting a central part. Anything else under that banner? I love that. Just as a practical point, but I'm sure you guys are already thinking this. Once you're collecting money from other churches, you'll need to set up effectively Sovereign Grace Churches of East Africa or some entity. I don't know how it works in your country, but there needs to be some entity that can have a bank account to keep in it. That's actually, otherwise, what are you going to do? You're just going to give it to one of the churches to look after, or you want to try and have an umbrella. So in Sovereign Grace Churches in Australia, we have Sovereign Grace Churches Australia, and then we have my church and Riley's church. They're actually 3 different things. So the money that my church and Riley's church, it goes to Sovereign Grace Churches Australia as an entity. So at some point you'll have to just think through the realities of the legalities of starting something like that. That in my history, that usually takes a while because it really has to be thought through quite well. But that's part of it. Yes. No, just for the mission. So 10% of our income goes into that Sovereign Grace Churches Australia part, which is no longer just my church deciding, it's his as well.
Actually 5%.
It's actually 5%. What happens in our churches, and I'm not saying you have to do this, but the way it works for us is 5% goes to Sovereign Grace Churches Australia, 5% goes to Sovereign Grace Churches Global, which makes things like this possible. So you might decide, as a possibility, which actually speaks to what James was saying, you might decide, because things are probably more financially difficult here, that's just a reality. You might decide, you know what, we're going to give 9% to Sovereign Grace Churches East Africa, but 1% we do want to send to Sovereign Grace Global so that we can be a part of what's going on around the world. That does affect your people. When the people are hearing, look, 1% of our income goes to churches in the Philippines and South Korea and Nepal, you start to feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, which is really neat. So you might want to think that, I wasn't talking about that today, but you might want to think through, hey, maybe a small percentage we want to send for global church planting around the world. It does something in your heart to in some ways it's Macedonia again, it's just that sense of we're in this. And that's really good. Anything else on the finance and prayer piece? That's great, really good. Usually what happens, or this is how it tends to play out, you can set it up as a separate entity and then a separate entity works it out. That can get quite pricey. So what people are tending to do is set up, say for a Sovereign Grace Churches Australia, There is a separate account for that, but the account is actually a part of my church, Sovereign Grace Church Sydney, which means our accountant can look after that on behalf of our churches. I can't touch that like I would the other money, but it just means that it's cheaper. It's affordable. So you might decide as a region, okay, we're going to set up Sovereign Grace Churches East Africa as an entity. We're going to give to it, but actually what we're giving to is a separate account for Trinity Fellowship, for example, and that account is only for all of our endeavours. But it probably save you money doing that, because then Michael's church has to worry about looking after that account. Because in most cultures, you're going to have an accountant and a bookkeeper, and if you set it up as a separate entity, it can just get quite expensive. But a time will come when you probably will need to, and then the account's different, and you do have your own accountant, and well, in ours anyway. Yeah, in ours anyway. Ironically, I'm not even a signatory, so we have, which I think you definitely want to be. I mean, it depends how your culture works, but I'm really careful with money, so I'm not even a signatory on our account. And I like that, because I could probably be the most aimed at, that somebody could say, oh, I think it's you. I can't even sign a check, and it helps you. It helps you like, I can't possibly do that, which just makes it a bit easier. Sorry? It does, yeah, that's right. No, but it helps me if anybody makes an accusation against me, just to go, I can't even do that. It really helps you. But yeah, I would always be recommending a couple of things, multiple signatories, and also have, probably even that account, have somebody overseeing it. So Tommy Hill, who's the guy in the States that I work with on the leadership team, I would be recommending, hey, get Tommy involved with you. So whoever that committee is, get Tommy involved in that. So then you've got somebody outside as well. They're not getting any money for it, but they're just involved as well. Another set of eyes saying, hey, I think that's great, or what's that? I don't understand that. And just keeps it all really above board, and keeps it really, you want to be really transparent, and you want to be totally above reproach. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I love that. I think that's exactly right. The thing you'll have to think through on that, and I'm all for that, is making sure whenever your central pot comes together, if there's any finance involved in that, make sure you're clear what that central pot is for. Agree that what you know it's for. Only because I know in some situations they've got like a bit pulled. So it's a bit like, oh, I thought it was for planting, and then another church wants to use it to start an orphanage. And you're like, I didn't think that's what we're doing. So I'm not against that, I'm for that. But being super clear what this is for. What are we going to use this money for? That stuff in a lot of our churches tends to be more not the Sovereign Grace Churches East Africa bit, but on the side from that, churches working together. So the central pot tends to be church planting and care. That's just, we're raising this to plant churches, to run colleges, to train. That stuff is more, okay, on the side, we also want to start some orphan work or something like, how could we work together in this? How could we pull it together? That's actually quite common. The Philippines do that. Liberia does that. It's actually a really great thing.
One other thing I thought I'd show you is, just because I was like, oh, I'll show you what I actually did when I first gathered my launch team. So after people joined the church, I took them through all these sessions. So you can see here's a list of all the sessions. So the gospel, identity as disciples, there was one on sanctification, understanding doctrine, why we sing, the Holy Spirit, mission, what is the church, serving, fellowship, pastoral leadership. And I stole sessions from this old course called Starting Point, and then I put them together for myself when we did teaching and stuff like this. But the first time we gathered, I kind of gave them, this was going to be our rhythms as a launch team. So every week on... Yeah, there we go. Lots of things like that. So we were gathering, there we go, on a Thursday evening. We were doing those. We were praying every second Tuesday of the month, Sunday lunch once a month, doing some outreach and things like that. And then actually my first session with them was I set expectations. What's my role as the pastor? What's my wife's role as my wife? And clarifying that. What's their responsibilities as a launch team member? What will pastoral care look like? What does leadership look like? And then, there you go. What does it mean to be Sovereign Grace Church? Our mission statement, our 7 shared values, and then our 7 cultural values. And then I looked at giving. There you go. So that was week 1. So we did a lot there. So just thought I'd show you that as an example of that's one thing I did when we first launched the church. All right, Q&A time. So in terms of outreach and reaching it as a church, I mean, obviously your Sunday gathering is happening every week, so it's something you can always invite people to. And then we constantly building into our church, the way we did it was a lot of, we expect you to be on mission to your neighborhood, to your workplace, to your friends and family. So we're teaching them how to do that. So that's just organic mission that you don't pay for, it's not run by the church, but you're equipping the saints for the works of ministry. And then we would do particular outreach events. So as we were launching the church and even afterwards, we just walked around key areas in our city and just walked up to people and invited them along and told them about our church. And we probably, we reached maybe 500 to 1,000 people and one couple came. So that's our context. And then we've run like evangelistic programs, so one called Alpha, one called Christianity Explored. We actually did Alpha online, and we had a lot of people come to that. We had 25 people for a church of 50, so that was really good. And people came Christian, and so that was some of the things we did. And that all those events and programs just take a lot of organizational manpower. So we don't do a lot of them because there's only so many things you can get the church on board with amongst everything else they're already doing with their life and their family and life groups and all these things. And so we sort of target maybe 3 to 4 things a year that we're doing. So a course that we're running or a special Sunday that we're doing on top of regular evangelism. And then we did for a time want people to go out and just do walk-up evangelism. And that's what we call it, I don't know, outreach or whatever. But then we lost anyone that was willing to do it. And it's proved very ineffective in our area. So we haven't really wanted to give too much attention to that. Yeah, so that would be a few things. As a church, that's what we've done. I wouldn't say anything's been incredible, except for the one thing we did, which was the online Alpha, which just the Lord seemed to really work on. And people were so faithful in inviting. I mean, a church of 50, I reckon we invited 250 to 500 people to that. And, we had 25 people come along over 13 weeks. And then 10 of them went into Bible studies afterwards. And then one of them became a Christian. And so it's a lot of effort, a lot of work. We had a leadership team of 15 people to run that. And a lot of that for one believer. But, we're called to, seek the one. So, and I'm sure different cultures of Muslim, Lebanese Muslims in Australia are going to be very different to Somali Muslims in Ethiopia. So there's not just obviously the religion, but there's also the culture that goes and how it's imbibed. The only other thing I would say is that mission is the easiest thing to fall off the radar of the church. And as the lead pastor planter, you've got to continually bang that drum and encourage it to happen. Because people, are afraid. People don't want, it's hard. And so you constantly need to bring people back. So that's why it's in our mission statement, and it's in your church's one here, make Jesus known. So you can keep coming back to it, because instinctively it'll just peter out. Even in my own life, I have to keep, thinking about it.
It's so true, isn't it? Because our mission statements are, knowing, applying, and proclaiming. Knowing, people are very comfortable with that, like, oh yeah, I need to do that. Applying, yeah, that sounds good. We should do that in groups. Proclaiming, it's the easiest one to go, oh, I'm too busy at the minute, just knowing and applying. Rather than no, keep hitting that, keep ringing that bell.
One thing we did do is we did start a monthly mission prayer night as a church, because we wanted it just something to keep us praying. We pray to the Lord of the harvest, and to keep it on the agenda. So that happens once a month, and they're fruitful times. We get probably 10 to 20% of the church there, and we just pray. It's lovely. We pray local things and global things. Pray for you guys, stuff like that. Were there other questions that we had about anything more with the course or church planting or the first year, what that would look like, or anything?
So in some ways, the bigger question becomes, how does God even guide me? How do I know what am I meant to be doing? next? I think, number one, it is Riley's message. It is just real dependence upon the Lord. And the question I'd be asking is, Lord, where do you want me to be and what do you want me to do? I'd be asking it regularly. I'm all in for you. My life's not my own. I'm following you. Just let me know. I'm a pretty basic guy, so I always pray, Lord, please give me really big signposts so I know I don't want to miss it. I don't want to be guessing because I'm not that bright. So then I rest in that. I'm comfortable that if I don't get a really big signpost, it's kind of not yet. So I'm just carrying on doing what I'm meant to be doing, and I'm comfortable with that. So the first stage would be that. The second stage that I think is sometimes missed is just circumstances. So the fact that God has already brought you here. He's already set up the divine connections, friendships and all that you look back on, but you realize it's all a divine setup. So the Lord's up to something. And just seeing what opportunities open up. Because my experience has been when I'm praying for the signposts and then an opportunity comes up and you're like, man, I wonder if I would totally fit that. I could be quite excited about that. You're like, okay, well, that could be how the Lord's guiding you. The third piece of the puzzle for me is counsel. And I think most of the time God ends up counseling me, discipling me through counsel. So I would be sitting, if I'm in your old situation, as you're getting towards the end of your year, I'd probably be sitting with Josh, sitting with Michael and saying, hey, listen, from what you see of my life, what do you think I should be doing with it? Where do you think I should be going next? What do you think I should be considering? So you want the internal sense. But I think some of that also comes externally when somebody says, I wonder if... We were actually chatting with a man the other day who's on our academy, who has for years really pursued ministry, but not really known where he fits. And wherever he's ended up, people have always said, yeah, you're a really good guy. And I don't quite know where you fit. But we said to him, you know, brother, I think the next stage will probably be a internship at Riley's church. And for me, from what I've seen from you in this year, I could really imagine you going to a group of people that are already there. Maybe they've had a pastor who's old or he's finishing up. I think you would thrive in that environment of revitalizing a group and bringing them into sovereign grace. Particularly if it had a missional edge to it and a sort of mercy ministries edge. And his face lit up, didn't it? And he was like, I love that. That would be... And I think he was so encouraged that we recognized some gifting in him and an idea, and it captured his imagination, and it clearly resonated with him. So he went away encouraged and helped. And if he had never been humble enough to ask us the question, he's not got that. He's still sitting there wondering what he's meant to be doing. And so I think relying upon the Lord, taking into consideration circumstances. Lord, you've got me here. You've guided me here. What am I meant to be doing now? And then counsel. So asking other people, hey, help me see. What am I good at? What am I not good at? Do you think I could go lead a church? Do you think I would be an associate pastor? Do you think I should be a member of the church and make a real difference? I don't know. I'm open. I just want to make a difference in my life, and I'm super comfortable with your counsel, and that can be really super helpful. And that would be my three. What would you?
Well, I would just maybe share a story. We had people want us to come and plant a church down in our nation's capital. So Dave and I drove down there, and, you know, I had this... I'm an emotional person. So I got down there and I had this feeling like, I'm connecting here. I woke up early the next morning in prayer and was just like, I already had this feeling like the Lord's calling me here. And I just planted a church, and our church is nowhere near ready for me to move on. But I already had this feeling. I'm like, maybe I should be the guy that plants this church down here. And it was on my heart. I'm thinking about it, but I am emotional, and I do like new things. And you know, I planted a church. I'm aware of my own personality. So then start chatting to Dave, and then Dave's thinking, well, yeah, I could actually see you doing that. But we're like, yeah, but he's like, I know you, and this is what you're like, and so let's wait. And then Andy Farmer came out, and we put it to Andy, and Andy was like, you could, but here's some things to think through. And then I put it to Brendan, our other elder, and he was like, no. You're just excited because it's something new.
My other elder is not emotional. Yeah. He's like, no.
And through the council, we realized, okay, maybe, but not now. And so even though it would be a big risk is right, let's go and do it, the council and the prayer kind of coalesced into, well, if it is to happen, it's not now, so let's just sit tight And I felt really comfortable with that. And then I come here and I start thinking about church planting again. I'm like, oh, maybe. But it's still just, so there's that sense of like, well, we could do it. I really don't want to, but we could do it. But I'm just, again, it's that same process. It's that internal prayer. It's looking at circumstances, and then it's getting counsel. And the counsel around me at the moment is saying, no, let's not do it now. So I'm like, okay, I'll just keep my head down in Parramatta and see what the Lord's got for me there, and I'll stay there until the Lord calls me elsewhere. So that's, I don't know if that helps, but that's just a practical, I don't know how else to do it other than a dream coming, like the Macedonian vision, and that would be handy, but other than that.
The one other piece that I've always operated on that I think has helped me is say, all what I said is still true. I'm waiting on the Lord for direction. I'm looking at circumstances. I'm really asking for counsel. But the way I function in my life is the Lord has me here. And so I'm going to live my life as if I'm going to die here. Yeah. And I'm going to give myself to this church. I'm going to give myself to this community. I'm all in. I wouldn't want to sit on my hands and just be like slightly out of it. And I'm just waiting. I don't know. I'm like, no, I'm all in as if I'm dying here. That's always helped me. Otherwise, you sometimes find when people are trying to work it out, they get a bit like they're not really divested anywhere. Because it's sort of like, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. So it's like, okay, well, what we're meant to be doing right now is building Trinity Fellowship and serving our wives and building this local church and giving ourselves away here and learning, and then get some counsel as you go forward. And I think the Lord will make it real clear as...
And you got to know yourself. If you're like more prone to risk and like, let's go for it and I'm just going to do it, then you're going to listen in and be like, oh. But if you're more prone to safety and you're like, oh, I don't really want it, then you've got to put around people that are going to challenge that as well. And hopefully somewhere in the middle, the Lord will direct you. Well, he will. He'll direct your path and your guidance. But so knowing yourself can help as well, as like knowing me, going, I just like new things. I want to start something. I like starting it. I don't like finishing it. So that doesn't mean God's calling me to do it. It's just a personal preference. I'd rather start a church than stay in it for 10 years because that's when it gets hard. It's exciting at the start. But that's just, so knowing yourself can help as well.
Yeah. I think the way, if I'm understanding you correctly, the way I think about it is counsel, not command. So, I'm asking for people's advice. But if what anybody said just didn't resonate, I'd be quite happy not to. Yeah, I don't know whether I'm ever like 100%, because there's always some doubt or there's some... I'm probably a sort of 78, 80% type of guy. If I'm there, I'm willing to give it a go. Probably because I know there's a sinful heart. So, for example, the global stuff that I do, I love what I do. I feel honoured that I get to do it. I can't believe I get to do it. I still feel like somebody at some point is going to go, I'm only joking. Of course you're not doing it, because it kind of feels like that. So I love it, and I feel God's called me to it. But before I really got involved in it, there was also some sense of, do I really want to travel all the time and be on planes for 24 hours, mostly by myself? Do I want that? Do I want the weight of global expectation and needing to figure out stuff? I don't know whether I want that. So there's the sin of comfort in there. There's the sin of the fear of man. What if I put in situations where I don't even know what I'm meant to be doing, and how long is it going to be before people work out I don't quite know what I'm doing? So there's that element. There's also the element of, would I be even any good at this before you start? So I think all those factors, and they sort of bring you down from 100% all the time. But in good conscience, having prayed about it, having talked to Riley about it actually, and Brendan at the time, and Patrick, and they're all like, I think you'd be really good at that. That seems to resonate really well. You're actually already doing quite a bit of it. And all those things just help build that faith. And for me, once I've got that sense of faith and joy and peace, even if I'm not 100% that I'm going to be able to do it, I'm in. So I kind of live my life like that. Carry on. Absolutely. I mean, I grew up in the Pentecostal stuff, so I get that. It would be thus saith the Lord. I mean, you need a prophet. If a prophet said thus saith the Lord, you were doing it.
If someone prophetically dances over you.
Then you're doing it.
You can't deny
But you would get that, and you chat to Pentecostals, or I have anyway, and they would say, I was just talking to God today, and he told me to do this, that, and the other, and you think, I mustn't have a relationship with God, because he doesn't talk to me quite like that. I sense things. I think this is what I'm going to be doing. So I'd be careful with that. I do think there should be a sense in our hearts of faith about something and joy in something and peace in something. But that's about as far as I'd go. I think there's many people around the world that would say, I don't think I've ever heard the audible voice of God. But you chat to Pentecostals as if they are hearing, you've had a dream and they are hearing God. You're going to go to Ethiopia and this is what you're going to do at this time. And then you're going to meet, and you're like, is that what he sounds like to you? That's amazing. I've never heard anything like that. I've sensed things at different times. Sometimes I think the Lord moves in a way that you could be chatting to Id at the end of a service and he says something and it's like a bell goes off in your heart and you're like, I think he's right. And it could be something random, but you sense, I think that's God directing me. And then you test that to a degree with counsel. I think that's the way God often guides us as well. I've had that many times where you're just like, somebody said something and you think, I feel really drawn to that actually. Or that announcement that came that people were just barely listening to. For me, I'm like, I'd love to do that. All right, well, that now we're probably starting to get directed by the Lord. See, I'd be careful of getting too caught up in, I think the one side of the coin is sort of very Pentecostal where you're going to have to hear from God himself. The other side of the coin is, God doesn't guide us at all, and so don't even take into consideration circumstances, just lay your life down for him and do whatever. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. They'd be like, no, I want to be guided by his word, guided by his spirit, guided by circumstances, guided by counsel. I think God's going to use all these together to help bring me forward so that I can make a wise decision. And in the meantime, you just bed down in the church and give your life away. It's a great question.